and the society and we've constructed, and the enormous implications of our illusions. Uh, we think it doesn't matter what we do for this community or that community because those people are essentially and inherently this way. Because we're working with the out group. Why? Yeah, right. If we return to our adapted period, if we live in tribes with just the basics, without a lot of modern luxuries and technologies, then the illusions won't be such a big deal. For some reason, fewer weapons, and then also because our modern systems are really out of sync with our natural abilities and preferences. And we're maintaining these systems because we think that we have like free will and decision making, we can do whatever, that there's no such thing as like I'm a brain and this is not the right environment for me. Yeah. What'd you finish it on? One can speculate how changes will impact upon the individual's identity, but it would seem that in an ever more crowded future, we are going to need a pretty strong sense of self to survive. No, we need to take advantage. You know that we need to take advantage of multiple brains. What do you mean a pretty strong sense of self, actually? How are you going to spend a whole book telling us that the self is an illusion? And then go, but now you're going to live, what'd you say? Sadder, less satisfying lives. Where those suckers who hadn't bought your book and embrace the self illusion feel fulfilled and purposeful. Nah, bro. Whatever. That's awesome. I love you. Like, can we have a beer? I should go to the UK, dude. Wait, where is he? Wait, where is he? I always feel like, oh, all my researchers are over in the US. So, you know. But we did talk about we're going to look at Spanish universities. Maybe we'll do that with Dad. Where is he now? He is currently a professor at the University of Bristol, where he conducts research at the School of Psychological Science and teaches the developmental psychology modules. You know what? You know better than anybody. I did not mean, there is no I, to mean the stuff that I was saying. I don't think that anybody's going to watch this, you know? So I was just playing that cool van philosopher cowboy armchair, being like, yo, this guy's probably done a TED talk, messed up the ending of his book. Look at me. If I'm able to say that, I'm a big shot. I don't stand by anything that anyway, let's start over. Bruce Hood. If I come to Bristol and spend 3 months in Bristol to reset my passport, can I park in your backyard? Talk it over with your daughters. I don't know where they still live at home. I don't know. I shouldn't have even mentioned your daughters. You mentioned them, and I thought that was like a good way to make a connection with you. But now I feel really weird about mentioning your daughters. Now it just keeps getting weirder and weirder. Can we start over one more? Can we do it one more time? Hey, Dr. Hood. My name is Aracil. Just finished in just a few days your book, The Self Illusion. Absolutely loved it. Want to see what's I really want to have conversation with you to see where you're at now, since we've learned so much. And gosh, the things that you were saying in your book, I thought that they were kind of recent discoveries. To see that you were saying this stuff in 2012, so awesome. And that's why I'm reaching out to you, and really 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 mean a lot to be able to meet your daughter. Okay, one exception. Charlie something from Oberlin College. Sorry, Echo 26 Golf 1617. He is my freshman year. He must have thought I was an idiot because he didn't even want to try to, not an idiot, but just not me, because he didn't want to try to explain his concept of God. And honestly, well, he was a very lazy attempt. I guess he was testing the waters to see whether I understood. And honestly, I didn't. So anyway, so that's an exception to something I'd said. Back wasn't even recording. That's actually perfect. Echo 26 Golf 1655. So as I was saying, you know what, bud? Hanging out with you here, absolute winner of an idea. Number one, we're socializing. Since there's no self, or lots of ways that a self could be defined, multiple selves could be defined. It's me and you, bud. Ma, pa, my yad. I thought yad meant something else. Oh, yod. My yad society. Yad, edest. So that's one reason. Second reason, I'm getting more reading done. The subtitles thing, I was too hard, or not the subtitles, but the text on the screen. I'll continue doing it for pink. I'm committed, but we got we got to make more faster progress than that. It's just easy work. Just easy work, bro. And I don't have to feel guilty. Oh no, I haven't invented Alaris yet. Someone says something to me, we disagree, and I still don't know what concretely to do with it, the statement, and define, its truth, or why it's false, determine whether it's worth dismissing, or whether I should OCD about it. And also, that's what I need to do to save the world. Invent reason, a system. And Bruce Hood and I are going to do that. I'm going to go to Bristol, camp out on his doorstep until he agrees to. And we can change it's not even my name, so no, it'll stay Alaris. And there'll be like the Hood technique. The first technique that we come up with, first specific step-by-step guide So what to do when you encounter new information or an opinion that you don't hold. The first technique is going to be the hood technique. Hell yeah, nigga. And we're going to use Gazaniga and his interpretive brain research, maybe. No, I think I just want to say the N-word. Okay, so, fan's not even on me. Can you hear me okay? Okay, so what are we doing now? Oh, it's easy work, socializing. I'm reading more, so it's productive. And I had to get through all of these so I can log out of this account. So what do you want to read next? Here are our choices. On being right. On being certain, believing you are right even when you're not, by Robert A. Bertain. I'm pretty sure. There was Robert Provine. Maybe there was not Robert Bertain. No, okay. By Robert Bertain. Let's read a little bit about that. The classification of mental states, accidentally clicked on chapter 4. It's called, oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. There's the preface, then chapter 1, the feeling of knowing. Chapter 2, how do we know what we know? Chapter 3, conviction isn't a choice. Did you watch the last video? It only works if it works. The classification of mental states, neural networks, modularity and emergence. When does a thought begin? Perceptual thoughts, a further classification, the pleasure of your thoughts, genes and thoughts, sensational thoughts, the twin pillars of certainty, reason and objectivity, faith. And the first section is welcome to the F word. Chapter 14, mind speculations. Chapter 15, final thoughts. Oh my goodness. And he's an MD, so he's probably going to have all kinds of interesting patient stuff, maybe from his own experience. Is that distracting you, my belly? It's distracting me. But we're doing a twofold thing. One, to be comfortable with it. And two, since we're actually not comfortable with it, to lose it. All right, so exciting. Let's do it. So exciting. Let's add a little, stop it. Oh, fuck. All right, let's add let's go to the title page. Note 2024 Echo 26. Damn it. 26 golf. All right, let's go, bro. How excited. This is for Adrienne. Let's go. Preface. Wait, this doesn't have audio, does it? We don't want to do it if it has audio. No, I don't think so. Okay. Preface. Certainty is everywhere. Fundamentalism is in full bloom. Legions of authorities cloaked in total conviction tell us why we should invade country X, ban the adventures of Huckleberry Finn in schools, or eat stewed tomatoes. How much brain damage is necessary to justify a plea of diminished capacity, the precise moment when a sperm in an egg must be treated as a human being, and why the stock market will eventually revert to historical returns. Don't know what that means. A public change of mind is national news. But why? Is this simply a matter of stubbornness, arrogance, and/or misguided thinking? Or is the problem more deeply rooted in brain biology? Since my early days in neurology training, I've been puzzled by this most basic of cognitive problems. Me since I was about 12. What does it mean? No, 18. So what does it mean to be convinced? At first glance, this question might sound foolish. You study the evidence, weigh the pros and cons, and make a decision. Shut the fuck up. If the evidence is strong enough, you are convinced that there is no other reasonable answer. Your resulting sense of certainty feels like the only logical and justifiable conclusion to a conscious and deliberate line of reasoning. And what do we say to them? Shut the fuck up. But modern biology is pointing in a different direction. Consider for a moment an acutely delusional schizophrenic patient telling you with absolute certainty that three-legged Martians are secretly tapping his phone and monitoring his thoughts. The patient is utterly convinced of the realness of the Martians. He knows that they exist even if we can't see them. And he is surprised that we aren't convinced. Given what we know now about the biology of schizophrenia, we recognize that the patient's brain chemistry has gone amok, resulting in wildly implausible thoughts that can't be talked away with logic and contrary evidence. We accept that his false sense of conviction has arisen out of a disturbed neurochemistry. It is through extreme examples of brain malfunction that neurologists painstakingly explore how their brain works under normal circumstances. For example, most readers will be familiar with the case of Phineas Gage. I prefer Phineas, the Vermont laborer whose skull and frontal region of the brain were pierced with an iron bar during an 1848 railroad construction accident. 1848 Inber 13 or India 13 Charlie. Anybody, including me, no, I mean I was pretty young when I figured that. Anybody who hasn't figured out where our brain since that date is just makes me laugh and cry when they say that they're reasonable. So we've got Phineas Gage, the Vermont laborer whose skull and frontal region of the brain were pierced with an iron bar during an 1848 railroad construction accident. Miraculously, he lived, but with a dramatically altered personality. By gathering together information from family, friends, and employers, his physicians were able to piece together one of the earliest accurate descriptions of how the frontal lobe affects behavior. Back to the pesky Martians. If Phineas Gage's post-traumatic personality change led to a better understanding of normal frontal lobe functions, is the schizophrenic's certainty that the Martians are listening to his thoughts a clue as to the origins of our sense of conviction? What is this patient telling us about the brain's ability to create the unshakable belief that what we feel that we know is, in fact, unequivocally correct? Are certainty and conviction purely deliberate, logical, and conscious choices, or not what they appear? For me, the evidence is overwhelming. The answer is startling and counterintuitive, yet unavoidable. The revolutionary premise at the heart of this book is, I'm so excited. What's the revolutionary premise? Let's go. Is it theory? Let's go. Hold on. Despite how certainty feels, it is neither a conscious choice nor even a thought process. Certainty and similar states of knowing what we know arise out of involuntary brain mechanisms that, like love or anger, function independently of reason. Yep, those are pretty central tenets of it theory, yep. To dispel the myth that we know what we know by conscious deliberation, words Papa loves, the first section of the book will show how the brain creates the involuntary sensation of knowing and how this sensation or impression, Dad, is affected by everything from genetic predispositions to perceptual illusions common to all bodily sensations. Then we can see how this non-reasoned feeling of knowing is at the heart of many seemingly irrevocable modern dilemmas. I'm a neurologist with a novelist's sensibility. Though I have tried to make this book as accurate as possible, there will be many areas of controversy and frank disagreement. My goal is not to defend each argument against all criticism, but rather to generate a discussion about the nature and limitations of how we know what we know. To keep the book from being too dense or riddled with jargon, I've relegated more technical details, explanations, most personal digressions, except for Eris's, and bibliography to the endnotes. But the personal digressions, that's how you keep it from being riddled with jargon. I must also confess to an underlying agenda. A stance of absolute certainty that precludes consideration of alternative opinions has always struck me as fundamentally wrong. And what has Eris said? Oh my gosh, I'm feeling so great reading all these books, and it's just like, all right, so yeah, correct. Obviously, I'm it's going to my head or to my ankles. If you speak French, it is how it is. I'm a human brain. I guess that's what happens. Anyway, and as Eris said, has said since his high school years, he's extremely. I think he said, I'm extremely distrustful of anyone who proclaims certainty, because there isn't enough evidence in the world. I'm sure it was eloquent to justify no longer considering new evidence or alternatives or something. It's not enough just evidence in the world to justify certainty, but there is enough need. I was wrong. It wasn't about need. As before I understood that's not about emotion, but I said, but and I think that's what the quote was. But there is enough emotion. Only emotion can take you to 100% evidence. If you just follow evidence, it cannot take you to 100% certainty. You just can't do it because there's just too many. It's only probability, as maybe Bruce Hood was saying. I don't know. And then what was the other thing he said? The great Eris, the great Silaris. He said, fuck, I lost it. A stance of absolute certainty that precludes consideration of alternative opinions has always struck me as fundamentally wrong. You're not the only one to brag. But such accusations are meaningless without the backing of hard science. So I have set out to provide a scientific basis for challenging our belief in certainty. An unavoidable side effect, the scientific evidence will also show the limits of scientific inquiry. But in pointing out the biological limits of reason, including scientific thought, I'm not making the case that all ideas are equal, or that scientific method is mere illusion. I do not wish to give ammunition to the legions of true believers who transform blind faith into evidence for creationism, alien abduction, or Aryan supremacy. What are you talking about? The scientific evidence will also show the limits of scientific inquiry. Okay, fine. But in pointing out the biological limits of reason, including scientific thought, I'm not saying that the scientific method is mere illusion. Oh, okay, great. And you're not saying that, oh yeah, okay, yeah, of course. The purpose is not to destroy the foundations of science, but only to point out the inherent limitations of the questions that science asks and the answers it provides. Okay. I mean, I do feel like you are coming at science with your language here, but let's. I want you to go for the human mind. Let's go at them. My goal is to strip away the power of certainty by exposing its involuntary neurological roots. If science can shame us into questioning the nature of conviction, we might develop some degree of tolerance and an increased willingness to consider alternative ideas, from opposing religious or scientific views to contrary opinions at the dinner table. Yeah, but also truth exists, right? Again, we're not saying everything's equal. Truth does exist. It's about when conviction. Just tell me about conviction, and Bruce Hood and I are going to invent a way through analysis assessing one's confidence. Use some Bayes' theorem and stuff like that, and how much actually that's definitely already been done, huh? I don't want to learn about statistics. Okay, good. That's just something I don't have to invent. All right, great. A personal note: the schema, the schema the schema that I'm about to present has given me an unintended new way of seeing common problems. It isn't that I think about each issue and how it relates to neurobiology. Rather, the very notion of how we know and even how we ask questions has shaped how I feel and respond to everything from the daily news to pillow talk with my wife to age old philosophical questions. The sense of an inner quiet born of acknowledging my limitations has been extraordinary. Is that what you got out of it? I would like to share this with you. Please do. But also, we have work to do, so I don't know why we would need inner quiet. But yes, no, I know what you're talking about. Yeah. Because the anxiety like goes away. Because it's like, oh, I'm a human brain. It's like, well, but yeah, for acknowledging limitations. But what about now? What are we gonna do about like spreading the gospel and stuff? We got work to do, you know. But thank you for sharing this. And also, I want to read something again. Rather, the very notion of how we know and even how we ask questions has shaped how I feel and respond to everything from the daily news. It's like so fundamental. It isn't that I think about each issue and how it relates to neurobiology or politics, but like just the questions being asked, the way it's framed, the representations we have, the the kinds of questions that we'll have a tendency to wonder about, what makes us feel satisfied, and whether we've got an answer, what kind of answer satisfies us. Maybe not the details, but knowing that that is neurobiology and limited, yeah, is, well, important and I guess can give peace. Okay. All right, we're not going to do a woe is me, but it changes everything, bro. How are you feel and respond to everything from the daily news to pillow talk with my wife? Is my wife out there who's, if you're with this, then oh my gosh, finally someone it's not going to be weird with. Someone who. Chapter 1: The Feeling of Knowing. I am stuck in an obligatory neighborhood cocktail party during the first week of the U.S. invasion of Iraq. A middle-aged, pinstriped lawyer announces that he'd love to be in the front lines when the troops reach Baghdad. Door-to-door fighting, he says, puffing up his chest. He says he's certain he could shoot an Iraqi soldier, although he's never been in a conflict bigger than a schoolyard brawl. I don't know, I say. I'd have trouble shooting some young kid who was being forced to fight. Not me. We're down to dog eat dog. He nods at his frowning wife, who's anti-invasion. All's fair in love and war. Then back to me. You're not one of those peacenik softies, are you? It wouldn't bother you to kill someone? Not a bit. You're sure? Absolutely. He's a neighbor and I can't escape, so I tell him one of my father's favorite self-mocking stories. During the 1930s and 40s, my father had a pharmacy in one of the tougher areas of San Francisco. He kept a small revolver hidden beneath the back cash register. One night a man approached, pulled out a knife, and demanded all the money in the register. My father reached under the counter, grabbed his gun, and aimed it at the robber. Drop it, the robber said, his knife pointing at my father's throat. You're not going to shoot me, but I will kill you. For a moment, it was a Hollywood standoff, mano a mano. Then my father put down his gun, emptied out the register, and handed over the money. What's your point? The lawyer asks. Your father should have shot him. Just the obvious, I say. You don't always know what you're going to do until you're in the moment. Sure you do. I know with absolute certainty that I'd shoot anyone who is threatening me. No chance of any hesitation. None at all. I know myself. I know what I would do. End of discussion. My mind reels with seemingly impossible questions. What kind of knowledge is I know myself and what I would do? Is it a, my quotes, conscious? No, okay. Is it a conscious decision based upon deep self contemplation, or is it a gut feeling? But what is a gut feeling? An unconscious decision? A mood or emotion? An ill-defined but clearly recognizable mental state, or a combination of all these ingredients? If we are to understand how we know what we know, we first need some ground rules, including a general classification of mental states that create our sense of knowledge about our knowledge. For simplicity, I have chosen to lump together the closely allied feelings of certainty, rightness, conviction, and correctness, all under the all-inclusive term, the feeling of knowing. Whether or not these are separate sensations or merely shades or degrees of a common feeling isn't important. What they do share is a common quality. Each is a form of meta-knowledge, knowledge about our knowledge, that qualifies or colors our thoughts, imbuing them with a sense of rightness or wrongness. When focusing on the phenomenology, how these sensations feel, I've chosen to use the term the feeling of knowing, in parentheses, in italics. Sick. When focusing on the phenomenology, how these, in parentheses, how these sensations feel, italicized, I've chosen to use the term the feeling of knowing, italicized, in parentheses, in italics. However, when talking about the underlying science, I'll use knowing in italics. Later, I will expand this category to include feelings of familiarity and realness, qualities that enhance our sense of correctness. I'm sorry, I was so focused on the meta-ness of the narration. Hold on. When focusing on the phenomenology, how these sensations feel, I've chosen to use the term the feeling of knowing in italics. However, when talking about the underlying science, I'll use knowing in italics. Chosen to use the feeling of knowing when talking about how these sensations feel. But then when I'm actually talking about the underlying science, what do you mean? Like the underlying mechanics? I'll use knowing. You mean the underlying mechanics or the underlying scientific process? Later, I will expand this category to include feelings of familiarity and realness, qualities that enhance our sense of correctness. Everyone is familiar with the most commonly recognized feeling of knowing. When asked a question, you feel strongly that you know an answer that you cannot immediately recall. Oh yeah, dude. I had no thoughts about how that might work. I have had some, but none of that were particularly that sung super that were super singy. Okay, let's go. When asked a question, you feel strongly that you know an answer that you cannot immediately recall. Psychologists refer to this hard to describe but easily recognizable feeling as a tip of the tongue sensation. The frequent accompanying comment as you scan your mental red Rolodex for the forgotten name or phone number. I know it, but I just can't think of it. I know it, but I just can't think of it. In this example, you are aware of knowing something without knowing what this sense of knowing refers to. Bro, it's just an it. There's like an it, like, those words are just coming out. I don't know. This sounds censor myth to me. Anyway, anyone who's been frustrated with a difficult math problem has appreciated the delicious moment of relief when an incomprehensible equation suddenly makes sense. We see the light. This aha is a notification from a subterranean portion of our mind, an involuntary, all clear signal that we have grasped the heart of a problem. It isn't just that we can solve the problem, we also know that we understand it. Oh, he's gonna say it's bullshit. Okay. most feelings of knowing are far less dramatic. We don't ordinarily sense them as spontaneous emotions or moods like love or happiness. Rather, they feel like thoughts, elements of a correct line of reasoning. We learn to add 2 plus 2. Our teacher tells us that 4 is the correct answer. Yes, we hear a portion of our mind say, we learn to add 2 plus 2. Our teacher tells us that 4 is the correct answer. Yes, we hear a portion of our mind say. Something within us tells us that we know that our answer is correct. At this simplest level of understanding, there are 2 components to our understanding. This is going to be so amazing. The knowledge that 2 plus 2 equals 4, and the judgment or assessment of this understanding. We know that our understanding that 2 plus 2 equals 4 is itself correct. We know that our understanding is correct. The feeling of knowing is also commonly recognized by its absence. I am so freaking excited because I talk about stuff that I can articulate in a way that can seem familiar, but it can still be not super easy concepts or concepts that are different from the schema that you already have. And I'll be talking to people, and they really believe that they have understood everything. And then we'll get to a point where it becomes clear, oh, no, we weren't. But just no alarms gone off. I'm absolutely so excited. And maybe saying no alarms went off is we're going to find out that's not really what it is. It's something slightly different. My hypothesis is that there is an it that is triggered by confusion. So if you're processing what someone says, and there's some kind of a conflict in the message, or there's some kind of a conflict between what they said and what was already in here. If that conflict is noticed, then there's an it that raises an alarm, right? If conflict, then confused, right? Now, if that guy isn't triggered, if the conflict isn't noticed, if there's no point at which the dominoes fall in such a way that, yeah, that it is alerted that there's a conflict, then there's no guy announcing that we're confused. I don't know how good of an explanation that is, but maybe it was just so general that no matter what he says, it'll have been right. I don't know. The feeling of knowing is also commonly recognized by its absence. Most of us are all too familiar with the frustration of being able to operate a computer without having any sense of how the computer really works, or learning physics despite having no feeling for the rightness of what you've learned. Is that why I have so much trouble with math and physics? It's not that I actually have trouble with it. It's just I'm not feeling the thing. And it's just like, so I just keep having alarms going off. Confusing. I can fix a frayed electrical cord, yet am puzzled by the very essence of electricity. I can pick up iron fillings with a magnet without having the slightest sense of what magnetism is. At a deeper level, most of us have agonized over those sickening crises of faith when firmly held personal beliefs are suddenly stripped of a visceral sense of correctness, rightness, or meaning. When our most considered beliefs suddenly don't feel right. Similarly, most of us have been shocked to hear that a close friend or relative has died unexpectedly, and yet we feel that he is still alive. Such upsetting news often takes time to sink in. This belief associated with hearing about a death is an example of the sometimes complete dissociation between intellectual and felt knowledge. To begin our discussion of the feeling of knowing, read the following excerpt at normal speed. Don't skim, give up halfway through, or skip to the explanation, because this experience can't be duplicated once you know the explanation. Take a moment to ask yourself how you feel about the paragraph. After reading the clarifying word, reread the paragraph. As you do so, please pay close attention to the shifts in your mental state and your feeling about the paragraph. All right, let's just do it. A newspaper is better than a magazine. A seashore is a better place than the street. At first, it is better to run than to walk. You may have to try several times. It takes some skill, but it is easy to learn. Even young children can enjoy it. Once successful, complications are minimal. Birds seldom get too close. Rain, however, soaks in very fast. Too many people doing the same. I gotta pause because it's the next page. I don't want my eyes to see anything. I'll just let him do it. I fucked up. I'm sorry. Rain, however, soaks in very fast. Two people doing the same thing can also cause problems. One needs lots of room. If there are no complications, it can be very peaceful. A rock will serve as an anchor. If things break loose from it, however, you will not get a second chance. Is this paragraph comprehensible or meaningless? Feel your mind sort through potential explanations. Everything came up empty. And nothing triggered a feeling of, oh, that's what it is. For me, anyway. Feel your mind sort through potential explanations. Now, watch what happens with the presentation of a single word. Kite. You already gave me instructions. You said after reading clarifying word, reread the paragraph. But you keep fucking talking. As you reread the paragraph, feel the prior discomfort of something amiss shifting to a pleasing sense of rightness. A newspaper is better than a magazine. A seashore is a better place than the street. At first, it is better to run than to walk. You may have to try several times. It takes some skill, but it's easy to learn. Even young children can enjoy it. Once successful, complications are minimal. Birds seldom get too close. Rain, however, soaks in very fast. Too many people doing the same thing can also cause problems. One needs lots of room. If there are no complications, it can be very peaceful. A rock will serve as an anchor. If things break loose from it, however, you will not get a second chance. As you reread the paragraph, feel the prior discomfort of something amiss shifting to a pleasing sense of rightness. Everything fits. Every sentence works and has meaning. Reread the paragraph again. It is impossible to regain the sense of not understanding. In an instant, without due conscious deliberation, the paragraph has been irreversibly infused with a feeling of knowing. So we do it another time now? All right. So you're try to feel like you don't know what this is talking about. Try to find that feeling of confusion and kind of that loss, kind of disconnected. A newspaper is better than a magazine. A seashore is a better place than the street. At first, it's better to run than to walk. You may have to try several times. Take some skill, but it's easy to learn. Even young children can enjoy it. Once successful, complications are minimal. Birds seldom get too close. Rain, however, soaks in very fast. Too many people doing the same thing can also cause problems. One needs lots of room. If there are no complications, it can be very peaceful. A rock will serve as an anchor. If things break loose from it, however, you will not get a second chance. Try to imagine other interpretations for the paragraph. Suppose I tell you that this is a collaborative poem written by a third grade class, or a collage of strung together fortune cookie quotes. Your mind balks. The presence of this feeling of knowing makes contemplating alternatives physically difficult. Each of us probably read the paragraph somewhat differently, but certain features seem universal. After seeing the word kite, we quickly go back and reread the paragraph, testing the sentences against this new piece of information. At some point, we are convinced, but when and how? The kite paragraph raises several questions central to our understanding of how we know something. Though each will be discussed at greater length in subsequent chapters, here's a sneak preview. It's 5 bullet points. Did you consciously decide that kite was the correct explanation for the paragraph, or did this decision occur involuntarily outside of conscious awareness? What brain mechanism or mechanisms created the shift from not knowing to knowing? When did this shift take place? Did you know that the explanation was correct before, during, or after you reread the paragraph? After rereading the paragraph, are you able to consciously separate out the feeling of knowing that kite is the correct answer from a reasoned understanding that the answer is correct? Are you sure that kite is the correct answer? If so, how do you know? Chapter 2. How do we know what we know? Parents and teachers' customary advice for not getting math and physics is to study harder and think more deeply about the problem. Their assumption is that more effort will bridge the gap between dry knowledge and felt understanding. Without this assumption, we would give up every time we failed to understand something at first glance. But for those what's the point of it all existential moments when formerly satisfactory feelings of purpose and meaning no longer feel right, history and experience have taught us differently. But for those what's the point of it all existential moments when formerly satisfactory feelings of purpose and meaning no longer feel right, history and experience have taught us differently. Logic and reason rarely are convincing. In this context, convincing is synonymous with reviving this missing feeling of knowing what life is about. This missing feeling of knowing what. Oh, in this context, convincing is synonymous with reviving this missing feeling of knowing what life is about. Instead, we conjure up images of ascetics, mystics, and spiritual seekers, those who have donned hair skirts, trekked through the desert a la Saint Jerome, huddled in caves or under trees, or sought isolation and silence in monasteries. Eastern religions emphasize a stillness of the mind rather than actively thinking about the missing sense of meaning. So, which is it? Should the remedy for the absence of the feeling of knowing be more conscious effort and hard thought, or less? Or are both of these common teachings at odds with more basic neurobiology? Consider the curious phenomenon of blind sight, perhaps the best studied example of the lack of the feeling of knowing in the presence of a state of knowledge. Section out of sight is not out of mind. When was this written, by the way? Yeah, well, believe it or not, I didn't find it. I don't see an info page, like a publisher's page or whatever. And it's got like an old-fashioned cover, but it's also about neuroscience. 2008. Okay. Okay. No worries, bro. I'm still curious about your opinions. Still curious about your perspective, what you got to say. Okay, out of sight is not out of mind. A patient has a stroke that selectively destroys his occipital cortex, the portion of the brain that receives primary visual inputs. His retina still records incoming information, but his malfunctioning visual cortex does not register the images sent from the retina. The result is that the patient consciously sees nothing. Okay, so this is Ramachan. Oh, I don't know. Okay, so the blind spot bias is what we've talked about in a couple of recent videos, which is which is our bias to bias blind spot is what they call it. Okay, bias blind spot, and then blind sight is when you're cortically blind. Okay, gotcha. Were you gonna remember that? Yeah, bias blind spot. I have a blind sight back to my own bias blind sight. I've got eyes working, but I have nothing to process it. Okay. Oh, except my superior colliculus. So his retina still records incoming information, but his malfunctioning visual cortex does not register the images sent from the retina. The result is that the patient consciously sees nothing. Now flash a light in various quadrants of his visual field. The patient reports that he sees nothing, yet he can fairly accurately localize the flashing light to the appropriate quadrant. He feels that he is guessing and is unaware that he is performing any better than by chance. How is this possible? He's like, I don't know. There. There. Wait a minute. He consciously sees nothing. What about blind sight people who don't know they're blind? For the other viewers, look that up. Maybe is cortical blindness and blind sight, are they two different things then? Look that up. Put a comment. Let's go. We're working together. I got to get back to the reading. How is this possible? First, let's trace the pathway of the unseen light. Some fibers from the retina. I need better. Some fibers from the retina proceed directly to the primary visual cortex. Some fibers from the retina proceed directly to the primary visual cortex in the occipital lobe, but other fibers bypass the region responsible for conscious seeing and instead project to subcortical and upper brainstem regions that do not produce a visual image. These lower brain areas are primarily concerned with automatic reflexive functions such as fight or flight. Quickly, right, so if that's the automatic stuff, then what the fuck is the rest? It's you. It's I hate when people are like, oh, that's the automatic stuff, the neurons. But then I'm like this. Quickly approaching or looming objects cause the body to swing the head into position so that the eyes can examine the threat. An immediate reflexive action has clear evolutionary benefits over more time-consuming conscious perception and deliberation. In the broadest sense, you could say that these subcortical regions see the threat without sending a visual image into awareness. Okay? Or into the rest of the fucking brain. Blind sight is a primitive, unconscious visual localization. It's more of an ability. Blind sight, that word, it doesn't mean blindness. It means seeing while being blind. Got it. Now I'm really up to speed here. Still put your comment because I know there's still stuff I'm missing. I'm missing that feeling of knowing. Blind sight is a primitive, unconscious visual localization and navigation system uncovered by the patient's cortical blindness. Right. Okay, now I fully get it. Blind sight is a primitive, unconscious visual localization and navigation system uncovered by the patient's cortical blindness. Still put that, or just put that sentence in the comments in case people scroll down while they're watching. The patient's subliminal knowledge of the location of the flashing light doesn't trigger the feeling of knowing because news of this knowledge can't reach the higher cortical regions that generate the feeling. As a result, the patient swears that he hasn't seen a flashing light, yet he clearly possesses a subliminal knowledge of the light's location. Oh no, but I still need to know about people who don't know that who say that they're not blind, who confabulate. As a result, and everybody else needs to know too. As a result, the patient swears that he hasn't seen a flashing light, yet he clearly possesses a subliminal knowledge of the light's location. When he chooses the proper visual field for the flashing light, he has no feeling that this is a correct answer. He does not know what he knows. Footnotes empty, okay. With blind sight, we see the disconnect between knowledge and awareness of this knowledge as being related to a fundamental flaw in our circuitry. This broken connection cannot be restored either through my quotes, conscious effort or stilling of the mind. The problem is not within our control. Though clinically apparent, blind sight is a rare event, usually caused by a stroke that interferes with the blood supply to the occipital cortex. Faulty expressions of the feeling of knowing are everyday occurrences. Though clinically apparent, blindsight is a rare event usually caused by a stroke that interferes with the blood supply to the occipital cortex. Faulty expressions of the feeling of knowing are everyday occurrences. Let's begin with our own memories. Bro, I swear to God, if any of you just complained that we're going to be reading about the same experiments over and over again, if you want to complain, say, well, we have all these conclusions, but we just keep, it's just the same experiment. That's a lot to base. Okay, that's like one thing, and like, fine, then just look into it. But it might just be that there are certain experiments that are more familiar, and so they're cited more often. But bro, I've had to do this for, okay, that's just a humble brag. So never mind, just let's keep going. Okay, section, the Challenger study. Flashbulb memories. Yes. Now that you know that it's about that, listen, what somebody said about it 4 years earlier. Try to remember where you were when Kennedy was assassinated, the Challenger blew up, or the World Trade Center was attacked. Now ask yourself how certain you are of those memories. If you believe that you are quite sure of where you were when you heard the news, keep that feeling in mind as you read about the Challenger study in the next pages. If you don't remember where you were, ask yourself how you know that you don't remember. Keep in mind the blindsight example when asking this question. Either way, try to understand the feeling and your degree of certainty of this memory. At my most recent med school reunion dinner, several former classmates were recalling where they were when Kennedy was assassinated. We had been in the second year of medical school, which meant that we all went to the same classes. Wherever one was, we probably all were. But the recollections were strikingly different. After dinner, the discussion was becoming increasingly heated, as though each classmate's mind was on trial. A urologist thought we were at lunch. An internist said that we were in the lab. A pathologist remembered being at a pub down the street from the med center. That can't be true, the urologist said. The assassination was at noon, Dallas time. You didn't go to the bars till after class. I laughed and briefly described the Challenger study. We're literally living our best lives right now. We're having so much fun right now. Oh my gosh, what if you guys are mean to me though? How much fun are we having then? Fuck, I don't know what we've already used. Hold on. I'm importing the reading of Bruce Hood's The Self-Illusion of Final Cut Pro. So audio's done event. I got all the way up to Echo 16 Delta. 3173 is the file number. Echo 15, Echo 16 Delta. Last one, 318. Oh no, that's not that. The last one is 3182. That's not what I just said, is it? Oh, I was actually looking at the first one. Okay, hold on. 3182, great. So now, Echo 26 Golf, back to Echo. Fuck it, all of that. Alright. Fix audio problems. No, do not balance color. We do not have time. Let's go. I laughed and briefly described the Challenger study. Within 1 day of the Space Shuttle Challenger explosion, Ulrich Neisser, a psychologist studying flashbulb memories, the recall of highly dramatic events, asked his class of 106 students to write down exactly how they'd heard about the explosion, where they were, what they'd been doing, and how they felt. Within 1 day, okay, in 1 day of this happening, he said, everybody, write down exactly how you heard about the explosion, where you were, what you'd been doing, and how you felt. 2.5 years later, they were again interviewed. 25% of the students subsequent accounts were strikingly different than their original journal entries. More than half the people had lesser degrees of error, and less than 10% had all the details correct. More than half the people had lesser degrees of error, and less than 10% had all the details correct. Prior to seeing their original journals, most students presumed that their memories were correct. Most of us reluctantly admit that memory changes over time. As kids, we saw how a story changed with retellings around a campfire. We have been in enough family reunions to hear once familiar shared events morphed into unrecognizable and often contradictory descriptions. So seeing that your journal entries were different than your recollection a couple of years later shouldn't be surprising. What startled me about the Challenger study were the students' responses when confronted with other conflicting accounts. Many express a high level of confidence that their false recollections were correct, despite being confronted with their own handwritten journals. Wow, Quarantine asked me, had they seen their journals before writing their accounts? I was like, no, of course not. Of course, that's true, but then they got to see their journals, and then they were still going, no, I'm pretty sure, no, I'm pretty sure how I remember it now is correct. The most unnerving was one student's comment, that's my handwriting, but that's not what happened. Why wouldn't the students consider their journal entries written shortly after the event to be more accurate than a recollection pulled up several years later? Pride? Stubbornness? Or fear of admitting an error? Not remembering the details of the Challenger explosion doesn't imply some massive personal failing that would make resistance to contrary evidence so overwhelming. Conversely, wouldn't pride in being logical and rational steer the students toward choosing their own handwriting over memories that they know might have been altered with time? The inflamed urologist interrupted me, insisting the pathologist concede that he was wrong. The pathologist refused, turned to me and said, you tell them, Bertain, you were there in the bar with me. Beats me. I just don't remember. That's not possible, the two warring doctors said simultaneously. Everyone remembers the Kennedy assassination. I shrugged and silently marveled at the vehemence of my classmates' convictions. Even telling them of the Challenger study persuaded no one, as though they were intent upon reproducing the very study that questioned their recollections. All felt that they were right, that they absolutely knew where they were and what they were doing when Kennedy was assassinated. I've told this story before, but I'm going to do it again because we're having so much fun. I read about this in The Invisible Gorilla, told a friend Ariel about it. She does this. The experiment does nothing to her, right? I'm thinking, I can't keep dating this woman. I'm telling my dad about it. Dad, I cannot keep dating this woman. Because I told her about this experiment. And even though I told her about the experiment, she still was not budging on her memories. All right, well, hang on, son. I know where I was on 9/11. Dad, you're not serious. Of course I know where I was. Okay, sure, there's a high chance that where you think you were is where you were, but like there are important details that you're gonna remember. No, I can see it. Of course Dad, do you understand what is happening right now? How meta this is and how upsetting this is? Section, Cognitive Dissonance. In 1957, Stanford professor of social psychology Leon Festinger introduced the term cognitive dissonance to describe the distressing mental state in which people find themselves doing things that don't fit with what they know or having opinions that do not fit with other opinions they hold. In a series of clever experiments, Festinger demonstrated that such tensions were more often minimized or resolved through changes in personal attitudes than by relinquishing the dissonant belief or opinion. These two things don't match. Actually, if I just change this like this, they do match. I mean, that was bad demonstration, but instead of these things don't match, fuck. Ugh. As an example, Festinger and his associates described a cult that believed that the world was going to be destroyed by a flood. When the flood did not happen, those less involved with the cult were more inclined to recognize that they had been wrong. The more invested members, who had given up their homes and jobs to work for the cult, were more likely to reinterpret the evidence to show that they were right all along, but that the earth was not destroyed because of their faithfulness. Fessinger's seminal observation: the more committed we are to a belief, the harder it is to relinquish, even in the face of overwhelming contradictory evidence. Instead of acknowledging an error in judgment and abandoning the opinion, we tend to develop a new attitude or belief that will justify retaining it. There's something I forgot to highlight earlier. Fuck, it was in the preface. Ah, yes. He does not know what he knows. Go on, let's highlight that as well. I shrugged and silently marveled at the vehemence of my classmates' convictions. Even telling them of the Challenger's study persuaded no one, as though they were intent upon reproducing the very study that questioned their recollections. All felt that they were right. Oh, we were into cognitive dissonance. By giving us a model to consider how we deal with conflicting values, the theory of cognitive dissonance has become one of the most influential theories in social psychology. Yet it fails to convincingly answer why it is so difficult to relinquish unreasonable opinions, especially in light of seemingly convincing contrary evidence. It is easy to dismiss such behavior in cult members and others on the fringe, but what about those of us who presume ourselves to be less flaky, those of us who pride ourselves on being level-headed and reasonable? We might think of the Challenger study as an oddity, and to them we say, what? Shut the fuck up. But here are additional examples of consciously choosing a false belief because it feels correct, even when we know better. I've chosen the first. I'm going to read that again. Here are some examples of consciously choosing a false belief because it feels correct, even when we know better. I've chosen the first example as a prelude to the later discussion in Chapter 13 of the deeply rooted biological component of the science versus religion struggle. The second example, highlighting the cognitive dissonance of the placebo effect, introduces the idea that an unjustified feeling of knowing can have a clear adaptive benefit. Section: a scientist contemplates creationism. Kurt Wise, with a BA in geophysics from the University of Chicago, a PhD in geology from Harvard, where he studied under Stephen Jay Gould, and a professorship at Bryan College in Dayton, Tennessee, writes of his personal conflict between science and religion. I had to make a decision between evolution and scripture. Either the scripture was true and evolution was wrong, or evolution was true and I must toss out the Bible. It was there that night that I accepted the Word of God and rejected all that would ever counter it, including evolution. With that, in great sorrow, I tossed into the fire all my dreams and hopes in science. And now this final sentence, Dr. Bertain has italicized for us, and it follows some an ellipsis. If all the evidence in the universe turns against creationism, I would be the first to admit it, but I would still be a creationist because that is what the Word of God seems to indicate. Section: a patient confronts the placebo effect. In a study of 180 people with osteoarthritis of the knee, a team of Houston surgeons headed by Bruce Mosley, MD, found that patients who had sham arthroscopic surgery reported as much pain relief and improved mobility as patients who actually underwent the procedure. Mr. A 76-year-old retired World War II veteran with a 5-year history of disabling knee pain from X-ray documented degenerative osteoarthritis, was assigned to the placebo group. Sham surgery in which general anesthesia was given, superficial incisions were made in the skin over the knee, but no actual surgical repair was performed. After the procedure, Mr. A was informed that he had received sham surgery. The procedure was described in detail, just like do a little cut here, just so you would see a scar, you know. Nevertheless, he dramatically improved. For the first time in years, he was able to walk without a cane. When questioned, he both fully understood what sham surgery meant and fully believed that his knee had been fixed. I get it. You guys didn't go in there trying to fix anything. I get it. You didn't even touch anything. You just some superficial cuts. I get it. But whatever happened, you did fix my knee, though. I don't know whether you accident, whether you unclogged the blood vessels. I don't know what you did. I get that. There's still stuff we don't know, right? So my knee is fixed, I'm telling you. When questioned, he both fully understood what sham surgery meant and fully believed that his knee had been fixed. The surgery was 2 years ago, and the knee has never bothered me since. It's just like my other knee now. I give a whole lot of credit to Dr. Mosley. Whenever I see him on the TV, I call him the wife in and say, hey, there's the doctor that fixed my knee. Our creationist geologist cringes at his own irrationality and yet declares that he does not have a choice. A patient knows that he hasn't had any reparative surgery performed, yet insists that the doctor fix his knee. What if we could find patients who developed similar difficulties with reason as the result of specific brain insults, lesions? If brain malfunctions can produce a similar flawed logic, what might that tell us about the biological underpinnings of cognitive dissonances? Cotard syndrome, right? Think you're dead, you're not. Ms. B, a 29-year-old grad student hospitalized for an acute viral encephalitis, a viral inflammation of the brain, complained, nothing feels real. I'm dead. The patient refused any medical care. Nothing feels real. I'm dead. I am dead. The patient refused any medical care. There's no point in treating a dead person, she insisted. Her internist tried to reason with her. He asked her to put her hand on her chest and feel her heart beating. She did and agreed that her heart was beating. He suggested that the presence of a pulse must mean that she was not dead. The patient countered that since she was dead, her beating heart could not be evidence for being alive. She said she recognized that there was a logical inconsistency between being dead and being able to feel her beating heart, but that being dead felt more real than any contrary evidence that she was alive. Weeks later, Ms. B began to recover. Eventually, she no longer believed that she was dead. She was able to make a distinction between her recovered reality and her prior delusions. Yet, she continued to believe that it must be possible to feel one's heartbeat after death. After all, it had happened to her. Cotard syndrome, le délire de négation, is attributed to a French psychiatrist, Jules Cotard, who in 1882 described several patients with delusions of self-negation. Le délire de négation. D'autonégation, si tu veux. These ranged from the belief that parts of the body were missing or had putrefied, or the complete denial of bodily existence. The syndrome had been described with a variety of brain injuries, strokes, and dementia, as well as severe psychiatric disorders. The most extraordinary element of the syndrome is the patient's unshakable belief in being dead that overpowers any logical counter-conclusion. Feeling one's beating heart isn't sufficient evidence to overcome the more powerful sense of the reality of being dead. Other delusional syndromes associated with acute brain lesions include believing that a friend or a relative has been replaced by an imposter, or a double or has taken on different appearances or identities, or that an inanimate object has been replaced by an inferior copy. The clinical feature common to all of these syndromes is the inability of the patient to shake a belief that he logically knows is wrong. Why don't you talk about the belief of where they can't see, but they think they can? I hope you had a good comment there. Well, no, it doesn't have to be good. Just put a comment about that. There's no such thing as good. Mr. C, an elegant retired art dealer, was hospitalized overnight with a small stroke. The next morning, he felt well and was discharged. Within moments of returning home, he phoned my office in a panic. Oh no. He was certain that his favorite antique desk had been replaced by a cheap Levitt's reproduction. Hurry over and see for yourself. He lived near my office. I dropped by at lunchtime. The desk in question was a massive 18th century Italian refectory table that took up most of his den. It could easily seat a dozen. Just lifting it would require a minimum of several men. And it was far too wide to fit through the door without removing the French doors. I quickly pointed out the possibility of someone sneaking in, moving out the desk, and substituting a fake. Mr. C shook his head. Yes, I admit that it is physically impossible that the desk has been replaced. But it has. You just have to take my word for it. I know real when I see real, and this desk isn't real. He ran his hand along the grain, repeatedly fingering a couple of prominent wormholes. It's funny, he said, with a puzzled expression. These are exact replicas of the holes in my desk. They don't feel the least bit familiar. No, he announced emphatically. Someone must have replaced it. He then delivered the cognitive checkmate. After all, I know what I know. Although not restricted to a single area of the brain or a single definitive physiology, the most striking characteristic of these delusional misidentification syndromes is that the conflict between logic and a contrary feeling of knowing tends to be resolved in favor of feeling, rather than rejecting ideas and beliefs that defy common sense and overwhelming contrary evidence. Such patients end up using tortured logic to justify the more powerful sense of knowing what they know. Mr. C's statements also point out that knowing may also involve additional hard to define mental states, such as a sense of familiarity. Oh, I thought Mr. C said this himself. I was like, you got it, Mr. C. Mr. C's statements also point out that knowing may also involve additional hard to define mental states, such as a sense of familiarity and feelings of realness. Like the tip of the tongue sensation or the feeling of deja vu, a sense of being familiar suggests some prior experience or knowledge. When stumped on a multiple choice test question, we tend to choose the answer that feels most familiar. Though we have no justification, we presume that such answers are more likely to be correct than those that we don't recognize or seem unfamiliar. Mr. C's I know real when I see real points out how a sense of realness might also bias us toward believing that an idea is correct. Patients with delusional misidentification syndromes often use correct interchangeably with real. If you're with me on this journey, maybe you've had the experience of someone proclaiming deja vu. They're like, oh, I'm going to relax. Proclaiming deja vu and going, holy shit, I've been in this situation before. Does anybody else remember this? I have been in this exact moment before. And you're like, oh yeah, well, deja vu, it's more of a feeling of familiarity than an actual familiarity. No. I remember. And then, yeah, and someone had a red jacket over there. And you see that person has a red jacket. I think the other time it was like maybe a slightly different shade, but pretty much exactly the same. More of an impression of knowing, Father. Though we have no justification, blah, 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 blah. It is likely that Mr. C's stroke affected his ability to appropriately experience feelings of familiarity and realness. When neither the sight nor the feel of the desk triggered those feelings, he was forced to conclude that this desk could not be the original. Such delusions might be seen as an attempt to resolve a cognitive dissonance between hard evidence, The table is too big to move. And the absence of any feeling of familiarity and realness when Mr. C examined his desk. In chapter 3, yes. Oh no, I thought he was going to say faces. In chapter 3, we shall see that the mental states of familiarity, realness, conviction, truth, déjà vu, and tip of the tongue share a similar physiology with the feeling of knowing, including the ability to be directly triggered with electrical stimulation of the brain's limbic system. Section. It may be right, but it's not right. The other day, at a downtown garage, I left my car with valet parking. I returned, started to drive away, but felt something was wrong. I questioned the attendant's gaze, wondering if I'd paid too much. If you look at me because I paid too much, something's off. But he doesn't seem to think anything's off. I checked the gas and oil gauge and whether one of the doors was ajar. Then I realized that the seat had been readjusted by the attendant. It was a nominal difference. The seat was at most a half inch higher than usual. My derriere knew immediately. It took me considerably longer. I was reminded of a story attributed to Ludwig Wittgenstein. A man walks into a tailor's shop. The sign over the front door reads, "Customer satisfaction guaranteed." The man orders a custom-made suit that should fit exactly like the one he's wearing. We saw this story in Pinker. The tailor painstakingly measures every detail and jots them down in a notebook. A week later, the customer returns to try on the suit. "It's not right," the customer says. "It's not right," the customer says with annoyance. "Of course it is," the tailor says. "Here, I'll show you." The tailor takes out his measuring tape, compares the suit's readings with those in his notebook. See, they're identical. The customer shifts in his new suit, but is still uncomfortable and displeased. It may be right, but it's not right. He refuses to pay for the suit and storms out. This is not at all the same story. All right, we'll see. No, it's not at all the same story. No, I mean, there must be more to this story. In the case of my car seat, I was forced to think through all the possible reasons that I sensed something was wrong. Fortunately, there was something measurable, the new angle of the car seat, that italicized explained what I was italicized feeling. With the tailor example, the customer's sense of something amiss is a matter of taste, of inexpressible or subconscious aesthetics. No matter what the measurements, the suit does not feel right. The tailor demands his money. The customer admits that the suit was to his specifications, but not to his liking, and therefore is under no obligation to buy the suit. Alright, I couldn't find chapstick. Gum will have to do it, because I'm just a human brain, so I still feel hydrated or something. You can also drink water. So there's a stand up. Like, you gotta pay me for the suit. That's to your specifications. Yo, but it's not right though. Each feels that he is right. Hence that irritating popular refrain, end of discussion. We often talk about gut feelings. There is now extensive literature on the neuroenteric brain, as though some form of thought might actually originate in the pit of your stomach. Maybe so. And maybe my body just knew that my car seat was out of whack. But whatever the origin of the sensation, the key feature is that there seems to be an underlying sense or feeling that something is either correct or incorrect. Consider the similarity in tone between the Challenger Studies student who said, "That's my writing, but that's not what happened," and the suit customers. It might be right, but it's not right. When such a sense of conviction overrides obvious logical consistencies or scientific evidence, what is happening? Is it possible that there is an underlying neurophysiological basis for the specific sensation of feeling right or of being right that is so powerful that ordinary rational thought feels either wrong or irrelevant? Ordinary rational thought. Conviction versus knowledge. Is the jury rigged? The game fixed by a basic physiology hidden beneath awareness? This is so exciting when we're doing reading together like this, because between like 2009 and like maybe 2017 is the time where I read like all the books that on which eight theory is basically based, and I did it alone. I'm writing in my thing, I'm writing in my journal, I'm taking pictures, and but I was still kind of alone, even if I felt like I was keeping myself company, which is literally what's happening here as well. But it's even easier to feel like it's not alone here, and it's just so much fun going through these studies, and yeah, and it's gonna help us because when Dad comes, he's gonna be looking at me like I'm crazy if any of this shit comes out of my mouth, and he's gonna be like, "Eris, you got to look at the research." And this is reassuring that I'm not crazy. I am looking at the research. Okay. End of chapter. Chapter 3. Conviction isn't a choice. And the irony. It's like, my dad. Conviction, bro. Conviction, bro. It is no great accomplishment to hear a voice in your head. The accomplishment is to make sure that it is telling you the truth. A patient describing a near-death experience. I had a conversation about near-death experience, I think with 2 people recently. And they're like, I know that you don't like believe in that stuff, but like the testimony, blah, blah, blah. Like there are people who have seen blah, blah, blah. And it's like, how naive that we see reality. Like what? And also a little base. Like no concept that we have that has been demonstrated by evidence about life, about existence, or anything like that makes that even like that. There's but some people saw some stuff. I can't, but this guy, Dr. Bertain, could stimulate this and make them see whatever they want, whatever Dr. Bertain wants them to see. All right, conviction isn't a choice. Here's a quote from a patient describing a near-death experience. It's no great accomplishment to hear a voice in your head. The accomplishment is to make sure that it's telling you the truth. And you can't actually make sure. Did the patient get that? I don't know. Maybe the patient's like, you got to be a critical thinker. So then I thought critically, and I was like, yep, that's true. You can't know. Your feeling of truth is not an indication of truth. The studies of blind sight demonstrate that knowledge and the awareness of this knowledge arise from separate regions of the brain. So we should also be able to find clinical examples of the converse of blind sight, moments of abnormal or altered brain function when the expression of the feeling of knowing occurs in the absence of any knowledge. Of course, at first glance, the very idea of an isolated feeling of knowing seems ludicrous. A sense of knowledge, to have any meaning, must refer to something known. We know something, not nothing. To dispel this notion that a feeling of knowing must be attached to a thought, this chapter will briefly touch on such seemingly unrelated phenomena as spontaneously and chemically induced religious experiences, Dostoevsky's epileptic aura, as well as detailed temporal lobe stimulation studies. To experience the range of these states of knowing, unassociated with any specific knowledge, let's begin with the century-old classic, The Varieties of Religious Experience by William James, which for me remains one of the most elegant testimonials to the power of clinical observations to explore the mind. James offers these illuminating quotes, followed by my own comments. Italics in these excerpts are mine. Alfred Lord Tennyson, : oh, so this one's from Alfred Lord. Okay. Alfred Lord Tennyson. So here's what Alfred Lord Tennyson has to say. I have never had any revelations through anesthetics, but a kind of waking trance. This for lack of a better word. I have frequently had, quite up from my boyhood, when I have been all alone. What? I have never had any revelations through anesthetics, but a kind of waking trance. This for lack of a better word. I have frequently had, quite up from boyhood, when I have been all alone. This has come upon me through repeating my own name to myself silently, till all at once, as it were out of, hold on, this was written in like the late 19th century. This has come upon me through repeating my own name to myself silently, till all at once, as it were out of the intensity of the consciousness of individuality, individuality itself seemed to dissolve and fade away into boundless being. And this is not a confused state, but the clearest, the surest of the surest, utterly beyond words. By God Almighty, there is no delusion in the matter. It is no nebulous ecstasy, but a state of transcendent wonder associated with absolute clearness of mind. This is basically the censor myth. Kind of. Half of it. Or, you know, Saint Teresa. One day it was granted me to perceive in one instant how all things are seen and contained in God. I did not perceive them in their proper form, and nevertheless the view I had of them was of a sovereign clearness, and has remained vividly impressed upon my soul. The view was so subtle and delicate that the understanding cannot grasp it. James's summary opinion. Personal religious experience has its root and center in mystical states of consciousness. Its quality must be directly experienced. It cannot be imparted or transferred to others. In this peculiarity, mystical states are more like states of feeling than like states of intellect. Although so similar to states of feeling, mystical states seem to those who experience them to be also states of knowledge. They are states of insight into depths of truth, unplumbed by the discursive intellect. They are illuminations, revelations, full of significance and importance, all inarticulate though they remain. And as a rule, they carry with them a curious sense of authority for after time. They are states of insights into depths of truth, unplumbed by the discursive intellect. This is a brilliant observation, equating religious and mystical states with the sensation of knowing, and with the further recognition that such knowledge is felt, not thought. Though lacking in modern-day science techniques, James was able to put his finger directly on a key feature of how we know what we know. Mystical truth resembles the knowledge given to us in sensations more than that given by conceptual thought. Fuck you! Oh, that feels cool though. That's nice. In James's description, no. Oh yes, James's description is perfectly straightforward. With mystical states, people experience spontaneous mental sensations that feel like knowledge but occur in the absence of any specific knowledge. Felt knowledge. Knowledge without thought. Certainty without deliberation or even conscious awareness of having had a thought. Neurotheology. In James's time, speculations on the cause of religious epiphanies fell into two major camps. The psychological, hysteria, conversion reaction, schizoid personality disorder, and so on. Or the spiritual, with claims of direct revelation from a higher power. If you are watching this, Joan, and you know who you are. I don't remember what I was going to say. I was going to say something about, or maybe I was just going to say something about Joan. I don't remember. In James's time, speculations on the cause of religious epiphanies fell into two major camps. The psychological, hysteria, conversion reaction, schizoid personality disorder, and so on. Or the spiritual, with claims of direct revelation from a higher power. Now we are increasingly hearing of a third possibility. Recent neurophysiological studies suggest that such feelings arise directly from the activation of localized areas of the brain, the limbic system, either spontaneously or as a result of direct stimulation. According to UCLA neurologist Jeffrey Saver, this is the most compelling explanation for the mystical experiences of St. Paul, Muhammad, peace be upon him, Emmanuel Swedenborg, Joseph Smith, Marguerite Kemp, Joan of Arc, and St. Teresa. The passage most commonly cited by neurologists is from a journal entry of Dostoevsky. Though we lack pathological confirmation, the nature of Dostoevsky's seizures is typical of seizures arising from disorders of the temporal lobe limbic system structures. On Easter Eve night, circa 1870, Dostoevsky is talking with a friend about the nature of God. Suddenly he cries out, "God exists. He exists." God exists. He exists. Then he loses consciousness, experiencing an epileptic fit. Dostoevsky later wrote in his journal, "I felt that heaven was going down upon the earth and that it had engulfed me. I have really touched God. He came into me myself, yes. You all healthy people can't imagine the happiness which we epileptics feel during the second before our fit. I don't know if this felicity lasts for hours, seconds, hours, or months, but believe me, for all the joys that life may bring, I would not exchange this one." Or this one in particular, I don't know. Right. The issue, Joan, was your feeling of knowing. The more a person is guided by their feeling of knowing, and stronger a feeling of knowing is, and how sensitive it is, how much it can fluctuate, those can be real obstacles to learning. Because if I tell you something, if it doesn't sound right off the bat, then the whole mechanisms with compelled by an absolute feeling of that shapes, and I know that that's wrong, they close any entry to that information and just work on the response. We all have a feeling of knowing, but I definitely, it's less compelling for me. And then also, it can be habited or unhabited. It can be worked on, I believe, which is why I said to you,